Little evil. Have you ever felt an urge to peek through the door's peephole just to see what's going on? Not because you thought someone was knocking or heard any sounds outside, but simply to check if anything was going on at the entrance. As you walk through the hallway and past the door, you want to peek just to satisfy your curiosity. Do you understand this feeling? Can you recall doing it at least once? I wouldn't recommend it. I used to have this habit, and it cost me dearly. Although I might have been compelled to do it, it was an act of habit, a ritual, or an obsessive behavior. From the room, I'd go to the kitchen and peek, then go back to the room and peek again, then to the toilet and back. I didn't think much about what that symptom might mean because it was such a minor thing. Every person has signs of poor health. We all live in a world full of stress and stressful events. I didn't feel the need to look through the spy hole. I live on the top floor, so nobody goes through my door. There aren't any neighbors on the floor above mine. In front of my apartment there is only an empty, unadorned apartment which nobody is going to live in. I had no reason to look at what was going on over there. The view of the empty playground just soothed me, relieved the aching in my head. Until one day, when I saw a visitor outside my door. It happened in the evening. As usual, I lifted the lid and pressed my chest against the door and looked out. There was a small man standing there, although it wasn't really a man. A short, ugly creature. I stepped back from the door and rubbed my eyes, but it didn't change. It seemed to me that there was a dwarf standing there. He had a crimson complexion, yellow eyes, one lower than the other. His mouth was like a fish's and his upper lip was noticeably larger than his lower one. His mouth slit pointed downwards, and he was pot-bellied and his clothes looked shabby. He was standing in front of my door as if he expected someone to open it for him. Immediately, I realized that I had seen something otherworldly and not at all something that belonged in our world. I sensed that it was not worth revealing myself, and, trying not to make any noise, I retreated into the room. No one knocked on my door and it was silent in the hallway, but I knew that he was still there, not a man but a creature. I often suffered from a sense of loneliness, living alone where no one came to visit. Even last Christmas, when I met alone, I dreamed that at least one person would look at me. But I was not content with such visitors. They scared me. After much thought, I came to the conclusion that he might be a mythical creature. At a time when it's hard to hear anything at the entrance and you don't expect anyone to be there, there might be someone outside your door who isn't from this world. Not everything can be explained in this reality. Why they're standing there is a mystery, but it's most likely impossible for us to see those guests. There might be consequences if we meet them. It's no surprise that they act so quietly. They only show up when nobody's watching. But they do want to be seen. I accidentally got this chance because of my daily habit, and I decided to stop looking through the peepholes so much. It's true that these encounters are less common now, but I still don't stop altogether. Sometimes I forget and look through the peephole again, only to remember that it's not allowed. A week went by, and I didn't see any dwarves outside the door anymore, and this behavior again seemed less dangerous to me. I stopped straining as I peered through the peephole. All I saw was an empty hallway. I was disappointed, but then, one day, I saw it again. It was scary, but also interesting. The creature seemed to be a rare and valuable experience. I remembered that the peephole was a special optical device that allowed me to look through the door without revealing my presence in the apartment. I could even shine a flashlight and the light would not pass through the peephole. No one outside would be able to tell whether the peephole was open or closed. I could look at the creature for as long as I wanted. So, I returned to the peephole again. The creature was still there. When I looked at him, I noticed some new details of his appearance. He had pointed ears, and there were countless teeth in his mouth that looked like little needles. It was clear that he was not human. I watched him with great curiosity and almost lost my fear, but then he seemed to look at me and said, "If you look at me, I will rip out your eye." Those words struck me like a hammer to the head. I closed the peephole and ran into my room. I turned on the TV and wanted to drown out my fears with noise. A comedy show was on, and I laughed at the jokes that I would have considered stupid on another day. They were hysterical, though. The little man had scared me, and I didn't want to see anything like that again. I hoped that the image of the peephole would stay firmly in my mind as a symbol of danger. I thought it would be better to stick 2 fingers in my socket than to look at it again. I lasted a whole month before the peephole cover was taped shut. But I still didn't want to look at it. One day, I heard voices at the front door. I listened carefully. Apparently, they were 2 technicians from the internet provider talking about a cable in a box. I immediately opened the door to greet them and apologize for my intrusion. They explained that they needed to access the attic for their work. After that, for the next hour, I could still hear conversations outside my door and the sounds of the attic hatch being opened and closed. Then, the sound died down. I wondered if the technicians had finished their job or not. I decided not to open the door and face them again. So, I removed the tape from my peephole and checked through it. There was nothing to worry about. What had happened was in the past, and, in general, I owned my house. However, I still wanted to check the peephole just to be sure. I decided to do so. I clutched a piece of duct tape in my hand. A few days later, as I looked through the peephole, just as I did before, I immediately realized that my habit was returning. Was it possible to do without it? And apparently, he could not resist. I had suppressed my desire to peek through the lens for so long that my eyes were stronger than before. Every time I went to the door, an irresistible urge tugged me. If I fought it, I felt anxiety that only grew. I sat there, wondering if I had passed by without checking through the peephole. But it seemed to me that there was something important I needed to do. I needed to make sure everything was okay at the entrance, so I started this habit again. I was afraid to do it, and it was unnerving if I didn't. A magical circle. One day, I was supposed to see a terrible guest at the door. Only a matter of time, and I caught it. This time it was not a hideous dwarf, but a living shadow outside my door, a black silhouette of a man with visible eyes and teeth. The whites of his eyes and a smile stood out like grin from solid darkness. When I peered through the peephole, the shadowy figure leaned forward sharply, separating it from me. I heard a noise, but I can't remember what exactly it was. It was going to get me now. I recoiled and hit my head on the wall. A loud laugh came from outside the door, as if the dark figure were rejoicing in my fear. How was I supposed to live with that? As my nerves became more unsettled, I felt compelled to peek through the peephole again. I tried to avoid spending time at home in the evenings, but once I got home, I quickly went back to my old ways. I taped the peephole shut, but removed the tape the same day. It felt like there was a clothes pike on my nose, and I couldn't see the landing when I tried to breathe. My anxiety grew when I couldn't breathe without seeing the landing. I had read about obsessive behavior and now realized that I had been engaging in this ritual to try to calm my mind. After weeks of practicing, I had learned to control this habit. Everything was going well until I looked through the peephole again. This time, something supernatural forced me to keep going with the ritual. A mysterious brown puddle appeared on my front step. I brought a bucket and rags to clean it up, but half an hour later the puddle began to seep under the door. What was it? I peered through the peephole and saw it wasn't a dwarf or dark silhouette. The newcomer's face was concealed by a terrifying papier-mâché cat mask. There were large slits in the mask, but no eyes could be seen behind them. The creature's clothes were several sizes too big and completely obscured its figure. Only its hands seemed to be those of a woman, with long, sharp claws. The fingers were slim and elegant, covered in blood. In its right hand, the creature clutched a small penknife, also stained with blood. Both sleeves of its gray jacket were covered in blood and dripped down onto the floor, forming a puddle beneath my door. The creature stood motionless, gazing at my door. Although how I could see without eyes was a mystery to me, I had the courage to ask, "What do you want?" They did not respond. I placed the towel on the porch steps and did not go back to the door. I was tired of being watched. My guests were no longer standing silently outside the door. In the kitchen, the microwave beeped and my quick meal was ready. I tried to move through the hallway quickly, but then I heard a knock on the door. It was tapping on the bottom of the door. I immediately assumed it was a dwarf and, therefore, I did not ask who it was. He did not bother checking through the peephole or opening the door. I was trying to distract myself by eating yesterday's pizza that was still stuck in my throat. Another knock sounded on the door, and I heard a hoarse voice. "I told you, if you keep looking, I'll take your eye." And there was another knock. "Come here. You owe me your eye. I know where to put it." "A terrible dwarf, why did you look at me?" I ignored him, and he fell silent, but not for long. I no longer looked through the peephole, but now I feel like someone is looking at me from the other side of the door. I am sure I saw a yellow eye through an optical lens. I closed the peephole lid and did not reopen it. Then things got worse. At night, I was awakened by a knock. Not on the door, but on the window. Let me remind you that I live on the 23rd floor. My bed is right underneath the window, and I heard my knuckles tapping against the glass as I slept. I woke up. The windows were covered in curtains. I hoped I was just dreaming, and then there was a lot of knocking on the glass again. I can only imagine my horror now. I had been sitting with the windows closed throughout the day, fearing to see someone outside my window. The guests were not going to leave me alone. I felt like I was being watched from everywhere in my house. In my home, I saw a yellow eye in the drain of the sink, and it seemed to me as if I was being watched from above through the ventilation grates. It was unbearable. And when, yet again, there was a knock at my door, I collapsed on the carpet of the room and cried. "Please leave me alone," I said. "What do you want?" "I did not want to see you anymore. Leave me alone." The knocking stopped. I fell silent. I heard the dwarf's voice. "Don't just look through the peephole," he said. "Won't you?" "I won't," I shouted. "God knows I won't." "Okay." The dwarf croaked, and it became quiet. He and the other creatures felt sorry for me. For a long time, I couldn't sleep well at night. I often woke up in the middle of the night. For a long time, I was afraid to go past the front door. But no one bothered me anymore. There were no knocks on the door, no voices calling out, and no rustling in the night. My life had become the same as it had been before. My apartment was quiet and lonely. There was nothing oppressive about the loneliness anymore. It was peaceful, private, and with myself alone. I tried to appreciate the silence for a while. But even that didn't last forever. I wish I could blame my situation on a nervous breakdown, but I know it's not true. I know I'm responsible for my own actions. At first, I felt relieved that the problem had passed me by, but then I realized that I was still in trouble. I was working and leading a lonely life, and I didn't feel any connection to the other world. All I saw was a boring, mundane reality, and it was starting to feel like it was all I knew. I started to think that our reality was just a flat, two-dimensional picture, while the real three-dimensional world was where strange creatures lived. It felt like they were behind the scenes, watching us all the time, but we couldn't see them. We didn't like that, but they didn't care. They didn't want us to see them or to understand their world. They wanted us to stay in our boring little world where we thought we were alone. But we're not alone, and we need to start looking beyond our own little world. When we humans spy on others, we really want to see more. And I know of one way to look through a peephole at a time when nothing is heard from outside the door. I had promised myself never to do this, but at that moment, it was all I wanted. I was not interested in anything else anymore. I tried to find something else to do without feeling any emotions. I just wanted to see. It took several months for me to decide to do this. I lifted the lid of the peephole, pressed myself against the door, and looked through. A small, crimson hand reached through the lens, and that was all I could see. Small fingers slipped under my eyelids and pulled. It hurt so much. I stopped seeing with my right eye. I lost it. I turned to the mirror and saw an empty socket. A dwarf laughed outside the door. "Now look as much as you want. Keep your eyes open. This is my story of how I lost an eye, and I won't tell anyone because they'll think I'm crazy." Since then, I've been wearing an eye prosthesis, and I want to say that now I see the world with only one eye. But that's not quite true either. Even on the first day after my eye was lost, I started to see what the eye had lost. When I went to sleep, I saw dark basements, dungeons, and pipes. Someone with my vision was walking through them. Those visions kept me from sleeping well. One night, while falling asleep, I saw a homeless man sleeping on a pipe in a dark sewage tunnel. It seemed like I was standing above a bearded man, but I wasn't. A woman raised a small knife over the sleeping man and plunged it straight into his chest. The poor man opened his eyes in horror and screamed. I couldn't hear him, but it's clear he was screaming with pain and fear, and the woman was pressing hard on the knife handle. Dark blood gushed out like a waterfall. The beggar stopped screaming and his eyes went out. She had killed him. I had to witness similar scenes of violence several more times. The victims of this creature were always homeless people who slept in manholes or closed heating mains. Beggars were attacked while they were asleep. I had seen their chests or throats pierced. I wanted to convince myself that none of it was real. These were just mirages created by otherworldly creatures trying to scare me, but lately I had become convinced that my vision was really attached to someone else. I went to bed, turned out the light, laid my head on the pillow, and saw the door to my apartment from outside. I got up and walked into the hallway. I lifted the cover of the peephole, and when I looked through it, there was a creature wearing a papier-mâché cat mask. A blue-eyed shine with a lively sparkle through one of the holes. It was my own eye.
Subscribe to the channel.